Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a waitress at a family diner called Mel's Place on the outskirts of downtown. It's not glamorous, sticky vinyl booths, coffee that's been sitting too long, and customers who sometimes leave more attitude than tips. But that Thanksgiving 3 years ago, my own sister made me feel smaller than I'd ever felt serving the rudest customer. She kicked me out of our family dinner for being just a waitress. What she didn't know was that I was about to take away something worth $50,000. Have you ever been judged by your own family for the work you do to survive? Have they made you feel ashamed of honest work? Because what happened next changed everything between us forever. The whole thing started 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Jessica, my older sister, had just gotten engaged to David, this hotshot CEO of some tech startup. She'd been dating him for 8 months, and suddenly she was acting like she'd discovered the secret to life itself. Every conversation became about building wealth, networking with successful people, and elevating your social circle. I should have seen the signs when she started using phrases like return on investment in casual conversation, or when she stopped asking about my life altogether. But I guess I was still hoping my sister would just be my sister. The family dinner was supposed to be special. Mom had been planning it for weeks. The good china, her famous herb-crusted turkey, the whole Norman Rockwell setup. Jessica insisted on hosting it at her new apartment, this sleek downtown loft that David helped her afford. She kept calling it our first family gathering as an engaged couple, like she was already married and the rest of us were just supporting characters in her success story. I showed up that Thursday evening with my contribution to dinner, a homemade pumpkin cheesecake that I'd spent 3 hours perfecting after my morning shift. I was exhausted but excited. Family dinners used to be our thing. Growing up, Jessica and I would help Mom set the table while Dad carved the turkey, and we'd all share what we were grateful for. Simple, but it mattered. The moment I walked into Jessica's apartment, I felt the shift. The lighting was different, harsh and clinical. The table was set with place cards, like we were strangers at a wedding. And Jessica looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't like what she found. "Sarah," she said, air kissing near my cheek without actually touching me. "You made it. How was work?" The way she said work made it sound like a communicable disease. "It was good," I replied, holding up the cheesecake. "Long morning shift, but I had time to make dessert." David appeared beside her, all teeth and cologne. "A morning shift, wow. Most successful people I know are already in their second meeting by 9 a.m. He laughed like he'd made a joke, but his eyes weren't smiling. I should have left right then. But I kept thinking about Mom's excited voice when she called to confirm I was coming, how she'd said, "It'll be so nice to have both my girls together." Dad and Mom arrived 20 minutes later, and we all gathered around Jessica's imposing dining table. The conversation started normally enough, David talking about his company's latest funding round, Jessica showing off her ring for the 100th time. But then Mom asked me about my week, and everything went sideways. "Sarah's been working at that little diner," Mom said warmly. "She's become their best waitress. The owner says customers ask for her specifically." I felt proud for a moment. Mrs. Chen, who owns Mel's Place, had told me that just last week. Regular customers did ask for my section because I remembered their orders, their kids' names, their stories. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real connection with real people. Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Mom, please don't call her their best waitress like it's some kind of achievement." The table went quiet. Dad cleared his throat. David suddenly became very interested in his sweet potatoes. "Jessica," Mom said carefully, "Sarah works very hard." "I'm sure she does," Jessica interrupted, setting down her fork with a sharp clink against the china. "But let's be honest about what we're talking about here. Taking orders and carrying plates isn't exactly ambitious." I felt heat creeping up my neck. "It's honest work, Jess." "Honest, sure. But is it going anywhere? Are you building anything? Creating value?" She turned to David like she was presenting evidence. "Sarah's been doing the same job for 2 years. No growth trajectory, no professional development. It's just stagnant." David nodded thoughtfully, like Jessica had made a profound business observation instead of insulting her own sister. "There's nothing wrong with service work," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "People need People need ambition, Jessica cut me off. They need vision. They need to surround themselves with others who are going places. She gestured around her expensive apartment. This doesn't happen by accident, Sarah. This happens because David and I make strategic choices about our careers, our relationships, our entire lifestyle. I looked at Mom and Dad. Mom was staring at her plate. Dad was doing that thing where he focused intensely on cutting his turkey, like precision carving could somehow fix the tension in the room. What exactly are you saying, Jessica? I asked. She sighed like I was being deliberately obtuse. I'm saying that if you want to be part of conversations about success, about building something meaningful, you need to actually be building something meaningful. Not just carrying coffee and wiping tables. The words hit me like ice water, but worse than the words was the silence that followed. Nobody defended me. Nobody said, "Jessica, that's enough." They just sat there, letting her words settle over the table like a toxic cloud. "You know what?" I said, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against her hardwood floor. "I think I understand what kind of conversation this is supposed to be." Jessica's expression shifted to something that might have been panic. "Sarah, don't be so sensitive. I'm trying to help you see." "I see perfectly clearly." I picked up my purse and the container I'd brought my cheesecake in. "This is a dinner for successful people, and apparently, I don't qualify." "That's not what I said," Jessica protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's exactly what you said." I looked around the table one more time. "Enjoy your strategic dinner conversation." I walked out before anyone could respond, before the tears could start, before I could say something I might regret. But as I waited for the elevator in Jessica's fancy building, I heard David's voice through her door. "That was probably for the best. You can't help people who don't want to help themselves." And Jessica's response, "I know. I just wish she could see what she's doing to herself." Like I was the problem. Like wanting basic respect from my own family was some kind of character defect. I cried in my car for 20 minutes before driving home to my studio apartment. I ate a peanut butter sandwich for Thanksgiving dinner and watched old movies until I fell asleep on my couch. The whole time, I kept waiting for someone to call, Mom, Dad, even Jessica, to apologize. But my phone stayed silent. The next morning, I woke up to a social media notification. Jessica had posted a long caption with her engagement photos. "So grateful for this season of life and for surrounding myself with people who inspire me to be better. Sometimes you have to make difficult choices about who gets access to your energy and your dreams. Choose wisely. Choose people who challenge you to grow." Blessed are leveling up. The comments were full of her work friends and David's business contacts congratulating her on her wisdom and boundaries. But I knew exactly who that post was really about. Over the next few days, the post got worse. Jessica started sharing articles about toxic family dynamics and cutting ties with people who drain your success energy. She never mentioned me by name, but anyone who knew our family would understand. She was publicly justifying what she'd done, turning me into the villain in her success story. The breaking point came when she posted a photo of her wedding binder, this thick, organized folder full of venue photos, flower arrangements, and guest lists. The caption read, "Wedding planning is so much easier when you're only including people who truly celebrate your happiness. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who try to hold you back. Grateful to be marrying into a family that values growth and achievement." I stared at that post for a long time, sitting in the break room at Mel's during my lunch break. Mrs. Chen found me there, phone in my hand, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. "You okay, honey?" she asked in her gentle way. "My sister's getting married," I said. "That's wonderful news. You must be so excited to be her maid of honor." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "I'm not invited." Mrs. Chen sat down across from me, her expression shifting to concern. What happened? So I told her everything, the dinner, the humiliation, the social media campaign against my character. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sarah, can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you think your sister knows about your other work?" "My other work." The thing I hadn't mentioned to anyone in my family because I was still building it, still making sure it was real before I started talking about it. The catering business I'd been running on weekends for the past year and a half, the food truck I'd bought and renovated, the private cooking lessons I gave to busy executives who wanted to learn basic meal prep, the work that was actually making me more money than Jessica's corporate salary. "No," I said slowly. "She doesn't know." Mrs. Chen smiled. Maybe it's time she learned. That night, I went home and really looked at my financial situation for the first time in months. Between my wages at Mel's, my weekend catering events, my food truck revenue, and my private cooking lessons, I was making almost $80,000 a year. Not bad for just a waitress. But there was something else I needed to check. Something I'd been putting off because family finances felt too complicated to untangle. I dug through my file cabinet until I found the paperwork from my grandmother's estate. Grandma Rose had died 2 years ago and left a trust fund that was supposed to be split between Jessica and me when we both turned 25. I'd turned 25 6 months ago, but Jessica had been handling all the paperwork since she worked in finance and understood complex financial instruments better than I did. I'd never actually seen the trust documents. I'd just trusted my sister to handle it fairly. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with banks and lawyers, tracking down information that should have been given to me automatically. What I discovered made my stomach drop and my anger rise in equal measure. The trust fund contained almost $200,000. According to the original documents, Jessica and I were supposed to receive equal access to the funds on our 25th birthdays. But Jessica had somehow convinced the bank to release her portion early for wedding expenses, while keeping mine locked up pending financial stability assessment. She'd been using my inheritance to fund her perfect life. I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by bank statements and legal documents, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about a dinner invitation anymore. This wasn't just about being called just a waitress. This was about systematic financial manipulation disguised as family concern. Jessica didn't think I was smart enough to check the numbers. She didn't think I was capable of understanding complex financial instruments. She'd been counting on me staying small, staying quiet, staying grateful for whatever scraps of family connection she decided to throw my way. She was wrong about all of it. I picked up my phone and called the number for the family lawyer who'd handled Grandma Rose's estate. It was late, but his voicemail promised he'd return calls within 24 hours for urgent matters. "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell," I said to the recording. "I need to discuss some irregularities with the Rose Mitchell Trust Fund. I have reason to believe my access to the inheritance has been improperly restricted. Please call me back as soon as possible." Then I opened my laptop and started researching wedding venues in our area. Specifically, I wanted to know their payment policies. How much was typically due up front? When did they require final payment? What happened if checks bounced? Jessica had taught me something valuable that Thanksgiving night. Sometimes you have to make strategic choices about who gets access to your energy and your dreams. She just hadn't realized I was about to choose myself. The lawyer called back the next morning while I was prepping vegetables for the lunch rush at Mel's. Robert Hendricks had been Grandma Rose's attorney for 30 years, and his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from dealing with family drama disguised as estate planning. "Sarah, I'm glad you called," he said after I explained my concerns. "I've been wondering when you'd reach out about the trust access issues." My knife paused mid-chop. "You've been wondering?" "Your sister submitted some unusual paperwork about 6 months ago. Claims about your financial instability, concerns about your ability to manage a large sum responsibly. I'll be honest, it didn't sit right with me, but she provided documentation that seemed to support her position." "What kind of documentation?" "Employment records showing only part-time work, bank statements showing modest savings, a psychological evaluation suggesting you weren't ready for financial responsibility." He paused. "Sarah, did you undergo a psychological evaluation?" "Absolutely not." The anger in my voice made Mrs. Chen look up from across the kitchen with concern. "I thought as much. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I think we need to review some documents together." I left work early, telling Mrs. Chen I had a family emergency, which wasn't technically a lie. It was definitely an emergency, and it definitely involved family. Hendrix's office was exactly what you'd expect from a longtime estate attorney. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and the smell of old paper and coffee. He spread the trust documents across his massive desk like evidence in a trial. "Here's what your grandmother intended," he said, pointing to the original will. "Equal distribution to both granddaughters upon reaching age 25, with the option for early release for major life events, education, home purchase, or wedding expenses, but only with both beneficiaries' written consent." I studied the papers. Grandma Rose's handwriting was all over the margins, little notes about wanting to help us build stable lives. She'd specifically written, "Sarah's practical nature and Jessica's ambition will both serve them well, but in different ways." "Now here's what your sister submitted," Hendrix continued, sliding another set of documents toward me. "A petition for sole management of the trust, claiming you were financially irresponsible and potentially suffering from depression that impaired your judgment. The fake psychological evaluation was 3 pages of complete fiction. According to this document, I was unemployed, living paycheck to paycheck, showing signs of severe depression, and had specifically requested that Jessica handle all financial decisions for me because I felt overwhelmed by adult responsibilities." "Robert," I said carefully, "none of this is true. I work full-time, I have multiple income streams, and I've never spoken to any psychologist about financial management." "I suspected as much. The evaluation came from a clinic that primarily serves corporate executives for stress management. Seemed odd that you'd end up there." He pulled out another folder. "But here's what really made me suspicious: your sister's spending patterns." The bank statements told a story that made my blood boil. Jessica had withdrawn almost $50,000 from the trust in the past 6 months. Wedding venue deposit, $15,000. Dress and alterations, $8,000. Catering deposit, $12,000. Engagement party, $7,000. Ring upgrade, $6,000. She'd been living like a millionaire on money that was half mine. "There's more," Hendrix said. "She applied for early release of your portion as well, claiming it was for family wedding expenses that both beneficiaries agreed to share. According to her paperwork, you were so excited about her wedding that you wanted to contribute your entire inheritance to make it perfect." "I wasn't even invited to the engagement party," I said flatly. Hendrix leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, I need to ask you some questions for my records, and then I need to show you something that might upset you." For the next hour, he documented my actual financial situation: my employment at Mel's, my catering business, my food truck revenue, my savings account balance. When he added up my total annual income, his eyebrows rose. "You're making more than most of my clients," he said, "certainly more than your sister at her corporate job." Then he showed me the thing that was going to upset me: Jessica's wedding timeline and payment schedule. The venue required final payment 2 weeks before the wedding date. The caterer wanted their balance a week before. The photographer, florist, and band all had similar payment schedules staggered throughout the month leading up to the big day. Jessica's wedding was 6 weeks away. "Based on her bank statements, your sister has about $8,000 in her personal accounts," Hendrix explained. "David has more, but not enough to cover the remaining wedding expenses. She's counting on the final trust fund distribution to cover the last $25,000 in payments." "The trust fund that she illegally accessed using forged documents." "Precisely." He leaned forward. "Sarah, I'm obligated to tell you that you have grounds for criminal fraud charges. But I'm also obligated to tell you that family legal battles rarely end the way people hope they will." I sat quietly for a moment, thinking about Grandma Rose and her little margin notes about Jessica's ambition and my practical nature. She'd known us both so well. "What are my options?" I asked. "Option 1. We file fraud charges, freeze the entire trust, and let the courts sort it out. This will take months, maybe years, and will definitely destroy your relationship with your sister." "What's option 2? You take control of your portion of the trust immediately, and your sister has to find another way to pay for her wedding." He smiled slightly. "Of course, if she's already spent money she didn't have, assuming the trust would cover it. She'd have to come up with $25,000 in 6 weeks. With vendors who don't typically offer payment plans for wedding services. I thought about Jessica's social media posts, her public campaign to justify cutting me out of her life. Her message was clear. Successful people make strategic choices about who deserves their energy. She was right about that. She just had no idea how strategic my choices were about to become. I want option 2, I said, but I want to do this properly. Full legal documentation, everything by the book. Hendricks smiled the kind of smile that suggested he'd been hoping I'd say exactly that. I'll prepare the paperwork today. You can take control of your inheritance by tomorrow afternoon. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a business plan, not for my catering company or my food truck. I had plans for those already. This was a plan for justice. I researched every vendor Jessica had hired for her wedding. I checked their payment policies, their cancellation terms, their typical procedures when clients couldn't pay. I mapped out her timeline and identified the critical payment dates when everything would fall apart if she couldn't access the trust fund. But more importantly, I started documenting everything Jessica had done over the past 2 months. Screenshots of every social media post, copies of every article she'd shared about toxic family dynamics, records of every time she'd publicly suggested that people should cut off family members who drained success energy. If she wanted to play the social media game, I'd play it better. 2 days later, I walked into Jefferson Banking and Trust with a folder full of legal documents and Robert Hendricks by my side. The process took 3 hours, but when we walked out, I had full access to my inheritance, and Jessica's access had been frozen pending investigation of the documentation irregularities. I didn't touch the money immediately. Instead, I waited. I waited for Jessica to get the call from the bank. I waited for her to realize that her financial house of cards was about to collapse. I waited for her to panic. I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering, but I was curious to hear what story she'd try to tell. "Sarah," her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We need to talk." "Hello, Jessica. How are the wedding plans going?" "Cut the shit, Sarah. What did you do to the trust fund?" "I accessed my inheritance. You know, the money Grandma Rose left specifically for me. That money was earmarked for family expenses. For my wedding." "We discussed this." I almost laughed. "When did we discuss this exactly? Before or after you kicked me out of Thanksgiving dinner for being too unsuccessful to sit at your table?" "That's not—" "Sarah, listen to me. I made some financial commitments based on that money being available. If you freeze my access now, it's going to cause serious problems." "What kind of problems?" "Vendor problems, payment problems, the kind of problems that could ruin my wedding." I was quiet for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle. "Jessica, did you forge a psychological evaluation to gain access to my inheritance?" Silence. "Did you tell the bank that I was financially unstable and mentally incompetent to manage my own money?" More silence. "Did you spend $25,000 of my inheritance without my knowledge or consent?" "Sarah," she said finally, "you don't understand how these things work. The trust fund was just sitting there. You weren't using it. I was making productive investments in our family's future." "Your future, your wedding, your investments." My voice was getting sharper. "Where exactly do I fit into this family future you were investing in? You could have been part of it if you'd shown some ambition, some growth, some indication that you were serious about building something meaningful with your life." And there it was. Even caught red-handed in financial fraud, Jessica still thought the problem was my lack of ambition. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to figure out how to pay for your wedding without my money. You're going to stop posting passive-aggressive social media content about toxic family members. And you're going to publicly acknowledge that service work is legitimate, valuable work that deserves respect. Or what? Or I file criminal fraud charges and let the police sort out your forged documents and unauthorized access to my inheritance." The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. "You wouldn't," she said finally. "Try me." "Sarah, this is insane. You're talking about destroying my wedding over some petty family drama." "I'm talking about consequences for financial fraud, The drama was just the appetizer. What do you want? I want you to figure out what kind of person you want to be, because the person who forged psychological evaluations to steal her sister's inheritance, that person doesn't deserve a fairy tale wedding funded by stolen money. I hung up before she could respond. For the next 2 weeks, I watched Jessica's world slowly unravel through carefully timed social media updates. David started posting concerned messages about unexpected financial challenges and the real cost of dream weddings. Jessica's posts became increasingly frantic, crowdfunding campaigns for wedding expenses, requests for emergency loans from friends, and increasingly desperate attempts to justify why her wedding was somehow everyone else's responsibility to fund. The breaking point came when the venue called Jessica 3 days before the final payment deadline. I know this because I happened to be having lunch at the restaurant next door to Bella Vista Gardens when I saw Jessica's car screech into the parking lot. Through the window, I watched her storm into the venue manager's office. 20 minutes later, she emerged looking like she'd seen her future collapse in real time. That's when she called me again. "The venue wants $25,000 by Friday or they're canceling everything," she said without preamble. "That sounds like a problem." "Sarah, please, I'm begging you. I know I messed up. I know I handled things badly. But my wedding is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. If this gets canceled now, we lose everything. All the deposits, all the planning, everything. What are you asking me to do? Loan me the money. Just until David's next investment round closes. We'll pay you back with interest." I thought about that for a moment. Jessica, why would I loan money to someone who thinks I'm too financially irresponsible to manage my own inheritance? I never said that. You forged a psychological evaluation saying exactly that. That was just paperwork, legal formalities. I was trying to simplify the trust management. Even in crisis, she couldn't tell the truth. "Here's my counter-offer," I said. "Come to Mel's place tomorrow at noon. Bring David, Mom, and Dad. We're going to have a conversation about respect, honesty, and what family actually means. If that conversation goes well, we can talk about wedding funding." "Are you serious? You want us to come to your work?" "Yes. I want you to see what just a waitress actually does. I want you to meet the people I serve every day, people who treat me with more respect than my own sister. And I want you to acknowledge publicly and sincerely that your behavior has been unacceptable. And if I do this performance, you'll pay for my wedding? I'll consider helping you pay for your wedding, with my money, that you acknowledge is my money. Fine, we'll be there tomorrow." The next day, I watched through Mel's front window as Jessica, David, Mom, and Dad climbed out of David's BMW and stared at the diner like they'd never seen a working-class establishment before. Jessica was wearing what I assumed was her idea of dressing down. Designer jeans and a blouse that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I seated them in my section, in a booth with cracked vinyl and a slightly wobbly table. David immediately began wiping down his silverware with a napkin. Jessica kept glancing around like she was afraid someone would recognize her. "Welcome to Mel's," I said in my professional waitress voice. "Can I start you folks off with some coffee?" For the next hour, they watched me work. They saw me remember regular customers' orders without writing them down. They watched me joke with the construction workers who came in for lunch every day, listen to Mrs. Patterson's stories about her grandchildren, and help train the new busboy who spoke limited English. They saw me handle a difficult customer, a businessman who complained loudly about the speed of service and left a mess at his table. I dealt with him professionally, cleaned up his mess without complaint, and still smiled when the next customer sat down. When my shift manager told me I could take my break, I joined my family at their booth. "So," I said, sliding into the seat across from Jessica, "what did you think of the show?" Mom spoke first. "Honey, I had no idea. The way you handled that rude man, how you remember everyone's names. You're really good at this." Dad nodded. "That construction crew loves you. They were telling me you helped one of them find a job when his company laid him off." Jessica was quiet, but David looked like he'd had some kind of revelation. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about service work that were completely wrong. Watching you today, the skill level required, the emotional intelligence, it's actually quite impressive." I looked at Jessica. What about you? She was staring at the table, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the surface. I didn't know you were good at this. Being good at it was never the point, Jessica. The point was that you decided my work had no value without ever bothering to understand what I actually do. I know that now. Do you? Because 6 weeks ago, you told me I wasn't ambitious enough to sit at your dinner table. You told me I was stagnant, that I wasn't building anything meaningful. You used those words to justify stealing my inheritance and excluding me from your life. Tears started running down her cheeks. I know, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. Say it clearly. What? Say clearly what you were wrong about. I want to hear you acknowledge that service work has value, that I have value, and that your behavior was completely unacceptable. Jessica took a shaky breath. I was wrong to judge your work. I was wrong to treat you like you weren't successful enough to be part of our family. Service work is valuable and you're good at it, and I stole from you. I forged documents and stole your inheritance because I thought I deserved it more than you did. Why did you think that? Because I thought success meant making more money and having a fancy job and marrying someone important. I thought those things made me better than you. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. But watching you today, you're building something here. These people care about you. You're making a difference in their lives. And I was so busy looking down on you that I couldn't see it. I reached across the table and took her hand. Jessica, do you want to know what I'm really building? She nodded. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos from my last catering event, a corporate party for 50 people that I'd handled entirely myself. Then the pictures of my food truck at the weekend farmers market. Then the testimonials from the executives I taught cooking lessons to. I make almost $80,000 a year, I said quietly. More than you make at your corporate job. I own my own business. I have 6 months of expenses saved in my emergency fund. I'm not stagnant, Jessica. I'm not unsuccessful. I'm just successful in a way you refused to recognize. David's mouth fell open. You own a catering business? And a food truck. And I teach private cooking lessons. The waitressing at Mel's is just one part of what I do, but it's the part that keeps me connected to real people with real problems. It reminds me why the work matters. Jessica was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Why didn't you tell us? When? When would I have told you? During the family dinner where you kicked me out for being a failure? During the social media campaign where you posted about cutting toxic people out of your life? When exactly was I supposed to share my success with someone who'd already decided I didn't have any? The truth of that settled over the table like a heavy blanket. So what happens now? Jessica asked. I pulled out a cashier's check that I'd prepared that morning. $25,000, exactly what she needed to save her wedding. Now you call the venue and tell them the final payment is ready. You call all your vendors and confirm everything is back on track. And you get married to David in the wedding you planned. Jessica stared at the check like it might disappear. Sarah, I don't understand. After everything I did to you, you're my sister, I said simply. And despite everything, I love you. But this comes with conditions. What conditions? First, you make a public social media post acknowledging that you were wrong about service work and wrong about me. You apologize for the posts about toxic family members, and you make it clear that working-class jobs deserve respect. She nodded. Second, you and David pay me back every penny over the next 2 years. With interest. This is a loan, not a gift. Of course. And third, I looked directly into her eyes. You never, ever treat anyone's honest work as less valuable than your own again. Not mine, not anyone's. Because the moment you do, you'll remember that the person you looked down on was the person who saved your wedding. Jessica picked up the check with trembling hands. I'll remember. I promise I'll remember. 2 weeks later, I stood in the back row at Jessica's wedding, wearing a dress I'd bought with money from my catering business and watching my sister marry the man she loved in the venue my inheritance had saved. Her social media post had gone viral, not in the way she'd planned, but in a way that mattered. Hundreds of people in service industries had shared their own stories of being looked down on by family members. Jessica had inadvertently started a conversation about respect and dignity in all kinds of work. During her wedding toast, Jessica looked out at the crowd and found my eyes in the back of the room. I want to thank everyone who helped make this day possible, she said, but especially my sister Sarah, who taught me that success isn't about what job you have or how much money you make. It's about how you treat people, how you show up for the people you love, and how you use whatever talents you have to make the world a little bit better. She raised her glass toward me. Sarah, you're the most successful person I know, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I raised my own glass and mouthed, I love you too. Because at the end of the day, that's what family really means. Not surrounding yourself with people who make you feel successful, but being the kind of person who lifts others up, who recognizes value in all its forms, and who understands that true success is measured by how you treat the people who can do nothing for you. Jessica learned that lesson the hard way, but she learned it, and sometimes that's the best you can hope for. If you've ever been judged by your family for the work you do, or treated like you're less valuable because of your job, please share your story in the comments. I'll read everyone and I'll believe you, because no one deserves to be made to feel small for doing honest work, and every job that serves others has dignity and worth. Your work matters, your contribution matters, and you matter.